cusp of significant growth and transformation. Broadcasters, content creators, and tech innovators are reshaping what's possible. And here at NAB Show, we take pride in being the most trusted global stage for this evolution.
NAB Show is not only a celebration of storytelling, it is a launch pad where ideas take flight, where innovation meets inspiration, and where the tools and technologies you need to bring your visions to life are showcased in one place. Here, we celebrate every canvas and every storyteller. What story will you tell?
I feel like I get better at my craft just being here.
This place is awesome. You are so interactive.
You really get to be hands-on.
It's just one big social network.
It's cool that there's one big event like this everybody in the industry goes to. It's just priceless.
Hello and welcome to the RTS review of NAB 2025. I'm Scott Rose, I'm your moderator for this evening, and it promises to be an exciting discussion. As you will have noticed, it is being recorded for publication on the RTS socials afterwards. So when we get to the interactive portion, please, if you want to ask a question of our magnificent panel, raise your hand and wait for a microphone to come to you so we can hear your dulcet tones. With that in mind, let's introduce our panel this evening. We have a varied panel from across the industry, customers, vendors, and those representing industry organisations. So, now in a completely different order to what was on my cards, James Clement, the SVP of Technology and Operations from IMG Studios, Darren Long, who is CSS Programme Director, now at ITV, Chandni Patel, who is CTO of Emotion Systems, Tim Banks, CRO of Grass Valley, Jennie Marwick-Evans, who is from Manor Marketing and also the RTS Chair, and finally Chris Evans, who is Head of Insight and Innovation at the IABM. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel for this evening. So we always like to get a bit of a feel for how many people went to the show. Now, I know the panel can all put their hands up. Any of our audience travelled to Las Vegas 2 weeks ago for NAB? A reasonable number. Excellent. Okay, well, that's great. So, as I said, 2 weeks ago now, just over 2 weeks ago, in theoretical pre-registered 55,000 visitors descended upon Las Vegas. And for many, the show starts very early. Those guys and girls involved in show build-up can actually be out there a week in advance. But for most, the kick-off happens to be at the events that take place on the Saturday, whether they're vendor events or industry events. One of those events seemed to cause a bit of a stir this year. I know this because I followed Darren's LinkedIn thread, or Darren GPT as it became known during the show. So Darren, you went to the Devoncroft session. It seemed to make quite an impression on you. Would you share what you heard and what you thought of it with the panel?
Yeah, well, I think anyone who goes to NAB, if you're lucky enough to attend sort of Josh and Joe's session, I think it's always good to get a bit of a sort of test of the industry and see where it's going. And I think what was quite interesting was that a lot of people who went along to that event, what I noticed was a slight change of tone. And what was fascinating was more of the CEOs and CTOs sitting on the stage, being the cool guys in the nice shoes and the nice suits, even white suits. And all of a sudden, the tone and the change was definitely there. I think what's fascinating, which was Josh's statements that he came out with, was that the way that the industry is having to pivot. You know, let's talk about it. It's money. It's about how revenue comes into businesses. But it's also about how do we try and delayer and try and reduce costs. And that's absolutely one of the things which is paramount in Josh's announcements of what he went through. But I think the key themes in there were social and how obviously that's changing the view of way people view content. We know that, and we all talk about it. It's nothing new, but it is definitely making a difference, and that's making a lot of big enterprise organizations sit up and listen. It's about obviously fast and how revenue can be generated more from companies. And I think if you look at large media and broadcast companies, it's like, how many fast channels can we have and how much content do we have in the archive? And I think that's definitely changing the themes at the moment. But I definitely think revenue is just that big ticket item, which is how do we do things faster, quicker, which is also finally changing some of the conversation around innovation, because I think we've stalled for a little while. This industry definitely had a bad year in 2024. Good year from a various sporting events, but bad year from a point of view of how we were moving with projects and also with people. So I think my summary would be from that one part was that ultimately we've got to do things much, much faster. Even the tech companies out there have to, how can I say, be lighter, nimble, quicker, cooler, and more relevant to the people that are sitting in the audience. And revenue is one of those things which is pulling everyone through at the moment to try and look at how they do and monetize every single bit that they do today.
Excellent, excellent. Tim, would you say we've got to be cooler? Is Grass Valley going to be cooler now, looking forwards?
We'll certainly try to be cooler.
Excellent.
It's an interesting time because the word unprecedented comes up a lot, but it's because the change is fundamental and it's multi-dimensional. Its business models have to change, technology has to change, viewership behaviour's changing, demographics is changing, and all at breakneck speed. And I think, as Darren said, there's been kind of a stall or a pause or a think through what the future might hold. But if we're not careful, the future will be upon us before we realise. And actually, when we talk of some of the commercial challenges, that's a question for the industry. Is it time to pause, or actually is it now time to accelerate? Because those were the themes that we were picking up at the show. That actually, I think there is a sense that there's a tipping point, and evolution probably isn't quick enough now. We're into a period of revolution and thinking the unthinkable, and kind of the themes as you look across the market landscape generally, it's on each of us now. Either, what was the saying? Either disrupt or be disrupted. Everyone is having to rethink their business models, and you're either going to be ahead of that and shaping the landscape, or behind it and having to react on the back foot, and that's not where any of us wants to be.
Indeed. Certainly there was a lot of talk of 2025 being a transitional year. I mean, was that being polite? James, did you get this sense?
Yeah, I think to kind of roll back a couple of, might as well have a couple of thoughts in the Devoncroft thing, because that's almost becoming a reason, even just the one section where they really go for our industry, which is so rare, people actually going for our industry and they're coming from it from a finance point of view. That one moment is almost enough to get you to go and actually see the event, because it sparks so many different thoughts about how we operate. But they have been calling this out. The finance part of our industry has been calling this out for years. They've been looking at how things have been going, how the movie industry is going, how the different areas are going. The sport gets these blips where we have these peaks and troughs. And we see that in what we do here at IMG, the over time story. It's quite hard for us to be able to predict that future. So the scale of the manufacturers we then talk to on the floor, the large ones are, Tim's point, seeing this adoption of a more of a revolution mindset. But equally, those conversations with the smaller companies they're potentially better set in some of these conversations to move us quicker. So finally, I think this year, the conversation that was in Devoncroft a few years back is now on the floor. However, the answers aren't all there, and this disruption could come from anywhere now. It's not as straightforward as the largest company with the biggest capex is going to deliver the best product for us all going forwards. It can come from anywhere because the answers aren't as straightforward as they once were.
Interesting.
I think that was the John said it on the town hall earlier today, our newly announced CEO, that NAB marked reality meeting strategy. So we've been kind of painting this picture of the vision and the future of the industry and media facilities for the next kind of era of media production, but it's today. It is now, and that was the excitement that you could feel in some of the conversations at NAB.
Yeah.
So Chandni, is this playing into your hands here, being a smaller, more nimble organisation, do you think?
I think so, because I guess when people kind of instigate that kind of cost saving, revenue is so important now. The systems get less complex, and there are holes in that for smaller companies to plug. When you're looking at that big kind of overarching thing, those bigger companies, I mean, technology and innovation is still so important in the industry, and the smaller companies are the ones that can really focus on kind of plugging all those little holes. There's lots of opportunities opening up. It's hard to get into those opportunities, and as a smaller company, when people are kind of cost cutting, when shows are getting kind of different, that has an impact as well. But there's a lot of opportunity, kind of, if you can persevere, I think.
Excellent. Yeah, I think so. I mean, actually, from the IABM's perspective, you had the IABM Lounge, many members taking advantage of that space for meetings. What was the sense of the talk in the lounge and the IABM members around this kind of transition? Is it risk and peril, or is it opportunity?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of both, really, and I think that's our role as the IABM, you know, as a trade organisation, is during these points of kind of transformation, that actually, whether you're a large or a small organisation, leaning on us to, you know, help connect, support and inform what you're doing is more and more vital. So for us, this NAB was, you know, really pivotal for us to kind of re-establish and reassert that value that we're offering, you know, to the industry. And we put a big focus on some of the kind of the key themes that we see in the industry right now. So when we were giving our briefing before the first day, the three key pieces we were looking at were profitability. You know, we've talked about revenue and the importance of that for the end customers and also for the vendors themselves. The second piece, transformation, just being pivotal right there. And we've talked a lot about how unpredictable, volatile the market environment is. So that kind of third piece of the puzzle is that kind of destination we want to get to. And, you know, we've said we're not necessarily all there yet, but agility, right? To set up organizations in a way where you can be more agile in creating more reactive content, different, you know, pieces, whether that's launching a fast channel or something like that, but also on a product front, you know, in terms of being able to pivot your product portfolio in a more agile way. So those are kind of some of the key areas that we saw there. And I think, you know, within the IABM member lounge, we were, you know, really pleased to see, you know, the level of activity and engagement from our members. And actually on that point, we launched a call for content going into the show around these core themes. And we received, I think it was 72 responses in terms of people, you know, wanting to be part of our IABM TV interviews. 36 of those, we launched 5 themes for people to kind of engage with. 36 of those, so half of the submissions were all on business transformation. So that stood out, you know, in terms of the engagement, in terms of what vendors want to be talking about. They want to be talking about business transformation right now as well, and kind of advocating for that.
I mean, can I pick up on 2 things that you both spoke about? The core thing for me was the ability for smaller companies to also have an opportunity to kind of meet and talk about the end-to-end process and how they could play a part in it. And I think one of the things from IABM, and I went to a couple of meetings in there as well, and I think it's something which we do need to discuss around NAB and what the purpose is going forward, is those smaller companies need the support of organisations like Grass Valley and IABM and any organisations to actually be there, because I think what is relevant going forward is, can they afford to be there? And I think that's going to be really important going forward from an industry point of view, about actually having the support of those smaller companies being a bit more integral in, and I know you did, Tim, within sort of the things you did on your stand, having companies show and display some of the architecture they do that links into your bigger enterprise systems. So I think we do need to start looking more end-to-end, and one of the things and themes going forward is that capability. I keep going back to it. Buying products is great, but having a capability that is more end-to-end is what companies are looking for now, because they just cannot afford to keep buying products and labour and more people to actually deliver those. So I do hope the narrative changes just around how in NAB and IBC, and getting more of the smaller companies being part of their ecosystem, because we definitely need to see more of those companies.
That's interesting. And it's difficult in a big show, but even more difficult in a complex industry. How do you help those smaller companies stand out and get their message out? I mean, Jennie, you look after a lot of organisations within the broadcast business. How is it changing for you to position customers so that, you know, organisations like ITV can find a small company and the specialism that they offer?
It's changing drastically. I mean, it's like a whole new, it doesn't matter if it's transformation, pivotal, whatever, how you market and promote to end customers or even other vendors that you might actually want to have a relationship with is completely different. NAB itself really didn't necessarily help when we're in South, North and West. And it literally took about 20, 25 minutes to, you know, go from each hall. So when we're talking about end-to-end and stuff like that, and you want to be collaborative and understand a workflow, etc., you know, you might have somebody in South that could actually really work with somebody in West, but how on earth are you ever going to fix that and find it? As well as the IBM, there's the DPP, I mean, there's lots of other associations as well. But I think that enables people to have a far more collaborative conversation. But with regards to actually SMEs up to Grass Valley type thing, you have to work incredibly hard to get your message out there, and you have to use every single tool in that marketing box, and you have to be consistent and constant with what you do and how you do it. And unless you've made a load of, normally actually, not this NAB was the one of walk-ins, because so many people didn't know they were going to be attending until about a couple of weeks before the show. Atomos literally decided and had a booth 6 weeks before the show. So, you know, otherwise they weren't going to be going. Warner Brothers, our friends, American company, they were all planning on visiting NAB, and that was then cut. A couple of people, unfortunately, didn't get the email, so we're on the plane and then had to get home. But I think with regards to actually the cost of going to these shows as well, you know, as well as the actual exhibitor cost and everything else, you know, there's so many people, like today, you know, we have to actually talk about, you know, the events still have their place, but that's only part of actually how you get your message across and how you actually reach people. It's a very, very different world.
Absolutely. Talking of a different world, every morning we woke up and every morning there was a different tariff rate. Was almost the talk of the show floor.
Definitely was.
I'll start with the obvious person, Tim. You've got a beautiful manufacturing facility sat in Montreal.
We certainly
and
do.
a large number of customers in North America.
Yep.
Was tariffs on the radar, or maybe more generally business complexity and just concern over the changing mood of what was going to be applied to certain products? Was it a topic at all for you, or not?
Yeah, definitely, but we need to make sure it doesn't become a distraction, because it is just one other variable of the hundreds of variables we're all having to deal with every day. And so when we put it in context, actually a good complementary session to Devoncroft was the forum event that the GV Customer Council host on the Saturday morning. And we had some really interesting panel discussions there, kind of talking about, again, the importance of transformation from a business perspective, but also the importance of transformation in terms of technology being an enabler of that. And when we talked about the business transformation, so we had Dave was on there from Sky, Brad from Fox Sports, Israel from beIN, and Stu from Paramount. There's definitely a consensus forming that everyone, you mentioned it, Chris, everyone's looking for flexibility, agility in terms of the infrastructure to deliver savings, and that's savings in terms of cost, but that's savings in terms of time. So it's time to market, time to revenue. And so we're at a period where our clients and our partners are needing to place their bets effectively. That's what we're having to do. And that's where, you know, GV sees an opportunity and a responsibility to be a trusted partner in that. And certainly when we talk about innovation and best of breed, the best partner we can be is to create that ecosystem where our clients can be confident about interoperability, choosing best of breed from large companies or small technology companies, and without creating friction to that technology deployment. And sorry, that's a long way of answering your question, which is those investments. So the consensus from the group was we've all got the same kind of destination. We're all at different stages of the journey. We're all traveling at different speeds. But the key factors to enable that transformation, the view from that group of clients was technology isn't the obstacle any longer. The technology, that software-defined agile infrastructure, is proven today at scale. The biggest challenges they still need to overcome are organizational change management, which for some of them is a huge undertaking. And then it's access to funding, access to investment to make those changes. And that's why I'm coming back to the question is access to investment, access to funding, and approval of those investments is made easier by stability and predictability. And if the world wasn't complicated enough, the tariff regime changed 3 times during the 1 week that we were in Vegas.
Indeed.
And so, that, as I said, that's just another variable. It was interesting reading the IMF stuff yesterday. So IMF was saying that as a result of the kind of war on world trade, all of the growth forecasts are coming down. There's a 40% chance of recession in the US this year. That's going to be unhelpful in terms of investments. But I think it comes back to the other original thesis, which is the future we all live in, the future that our businesses operate, is by definition unpredictable and uncertain.
And people are coming to eat our lunch. Because if you look at, you know, the AV coming into our world, but I just think that it's not just the broadcast world anymore.
Yep.
And you can do so much cheaper, faster, better. So talk about being agile and all the rest of it. And the convergence between broadcast and AV, you know, it's here, it's happening, and, you know, it's having a massive, massive impact. Absolutely. And that coming back to NAB in a way, that's not what they're realising. I think that's not necessarily what they're helping us with. You have to go still to Infocom or ISE or whatever else. And I think that's probably where we need to sort of help, and when we try and work together a bit more collaboratively, just because we're doing sport or news or whatever it might be, but we need that stuff from them and that stuff from there.
Absolutely. I mean, it was really interesting at Devoncroft. One of the pieces I picked up was talking about, you know, award-winning motion picture films, you know, the best visual effects you can imagine, and the movie doesn't turn a profit. Mm-hmm. So for those in the production world, you know, really we're talking about a big change, aren't we, in terms of the cost of productions? And I mean, James, you were talking earlier about some of the things that are being made that people are watching, and being made on what we would have, I guess, rudely called prosumer equipment.
Yeah, I mean, we've all probably seen the behind the scenes of Adolescence and seen how they've done all those shots, because they're fascinating for everyone here. The one-take world, when it's pushed that even further with the amazing acting. But you see all those elements, and you think most of those, I imagine you could have seen at CES as well. You could have probably gone in and bought everything that was required to film. There's loads of bespokeness, I know, in how that's made, but the fundamentals are there instead of it needing to be a huge, complicated workflow that needs trucks and everything around it. So I think as we look how that relates over to into sport as well, there is a lot of content that's created in a similar dynamic, and how much we can address both parts and actually bring them together into one. I think that is the crux of all of this conversation around business transformation, is how all of these worlds are brought together within what we have as our own teams, how we bring these worlds together ourselves and the part we play. And also I think we as different parts of the supply chain have a bigger responsibility than ever to be clear about our strategies with our supply chain. I think one of the reflections I had out of NAB is the conversations I'm having with definitely being listened to more, because people are trying to extract the strategy out of us, and this 2025 is definitely the year of pivot and everyone looking at each other to see how they pivot, because we don't have enough time to spend any longer on this. So we need to be quick at making those bold decisions that have never been made before, and removing.
And brave, right?
Yeah, definitely brave. Like a lot of our conversations are around being brave.
Yeah.
Managing risk.
Yes.
But do you think, James, that there is a greater openness? Because that's what we see. There's much more collaboration. Collaboration between clients, collaboration with partners, collaboration between vendors.
I think there's a bigger realization that businesses aren't the same anymore. In the same way, if you listen to how a sporting tournament is made, on a stand or a lecture about, like, this is how we did this sporting event, the relevance you can pull out of that to think, well, maybe I'll do it like this, is decreasing over time. All of our clients are super bespoke. Our DNA is to make sure we can be as bespoke to cater for all those needs. We then want to work with partners who can do that as well. The transfer of actual working practices between any events is becoming less and less. So more of our conversation is around that, get the business and the culture right, and then those parts will come through after. I mean, just picking up on the risk side of it, I think we're willing to take a risk, and that's one of the things which traditionally we wouldn't have done. Now, we went through, all of that sort of a point a long time ago called COVID, but where we are now is we have the enablement. So you touched on it, Tim. We do have the ability to do things that we dreamed about at that particular time. So we're willing to take more of a risk and definitely look at things that no way would we have looked at to put through, what I would say high value content. And that's a good thing. And it's a good thing because I think there's always been a slight snobbery in the way we do things. That has to change. The one thing I definitely think I want to sort of just touch on is the manufacturers. You do work together and you do have APIs, but they're just not good enough. And what I mean by that is, as soon as we start looking at the end-to-end solution, which is ultimately where we have to get to try and look at how do we de-layer some of our systems and processes and everything, every time we get to that point, the most hardest thing is how do we put those things together? And so, there's many APIs and many versions of APIs. It's just the one thing where the industry as a whole needs to grow up a little bit and try and work better together, because the only way you sell products and systems is because I look at an end-to-end solution now. I look at how do we do things for that sort of price, with less people, with efficiency, with speed. And every time I keep hitting the same problem, which is we have amazing products out there, but as soon as you integrate them, it becomes just this really hard and needs clever people to be able to do it. And that's not nimble enough. And if you look at where we are in consumer and IT world, it is fairly, there's lots of standards, but you can link computers and IP together. And it's starting to get a lot more commodity focused, so off the shelf. And I think some of the themes I saw at IBC, which are good, was companies that were trying to do a different thing. In other words, whether you be a sound desk and all of a sudden now you're not a sound desk, you're a way of spinning up solutions, and different capabilities within what they do. And those are the themes which I got most heartened from seeing some of the major manufacturers, whether it be the tech companies like the AWSs and the Microsofts doing really clever things with apps and various automation, or whether companies are embracing sort of that much more sort of, how can I say, lower level of technology that actually is easier to sell. And naming names, I've seen companies which are changing their business model completely, which is, this is what we build, this is how much you pay for it, and this is what it gives you. And if you want adaptation, well, yeah, we can talk about services, but actually it's not part of our core DNA in any way. And I saw that with companies like Mediagenics and other companies out there that just kind of gone that Adobe route, which is, this is what you get. Yeah. You might not like it, but this is what you get.
Don't you think as well, because we're not selling to engineers as much, and that's the users are a different breed now? Yeah,
and it's important. It's still important to have the engineers, but decision makers at the top make the decisions. Yeah. Let's be really honest about it. Engineers, including myself, if I classify myself as one from years ago, definitely believe that they do set the agenda. But no, it's set by the business.
They're involved, but it's 5, 6, 10.
The business. Yeah. And I think what I want to again say is that that whole we build products, we give them to you, and you make content has to change. It's like, no, I need a solution. I need a way of doing things. I don't want to really know how difficult it is to integrate. I just want to know how to do it. You know, and I think we saw that at a lot of some of the stands. They are changing. And I tell you now, they need to change quicker because it won't be relevant.
I think from our research, what we're seeing in terms of this area, and there's two sides to this convergence, right, is where there's opportunity is where it's built around kind of solo operators or smaller scale production outfits, where it's then maybe in a broadcast environment working in what you might kind of call a tier 3 type, you know, kind of live environment. Or if we take a kind of a non-traditional vertical like a house of worship, corporate, government studio, it's again these people that haven't come from a trained broadcast background, and they're coming with generalist skills as opposed to specialized skills, and they're looking to have tools and solutions as the keyword there. Products presented as end-to-end solutions that they can manage with a smaller, lighter footprint of staff, and that might either be through automation and AI for skills augmentation, or that might just be because there's only a solo operator that can do it. On the flip side, then I think that comes back to the pivot and the change for broadcast to rethink about, you know, if you want to increase the coverage around a key piece of IP, you know, creating that shoulder content, those additional, you know, social assets or things like that, short form, you can't do that with the same production budget and scale that you've done the kind of the main feed. So then therefore, you need different tools and business models to do that. So I think that's one of the key areas we definitely see as an opportunity area for the vendors specifically that are engaging with that concept that you're talking about just there. And we did some research in Q4 around this idea of democratization of media tech, and we actually did a very perception-based survey around this, surveying, you know, different industry experts about what they saw as kind of a generalist task versus a specialized task. And you can actually see we kind of validated the fact that democratization has kind of already taken place, and this brings us back to the kind of the prosumer tools being good enough, you know, for certain levels of production. And, you know, you can kind of chart it looking at recording a piece of content with a DSLR mirrorless, recording with a smartphone, recording with a pro camcorder. And, you know, the responses skew from specialized skill to 100% in terms of generalist response, you know, for recording on a smartphone. So we've kind of already arrived at that point on the acquisition side, you know, conceptually. But then in terms of that end-to-end of producing multi-camera, doing the audio management, that's still where the professional tools need to come from the broadcast vendors, but need to be packaged and presented in a way that's kind of a whole ecosystem.
I'm going to go against that because I don't think that is the case anymore. I genuinely don't. I think, you know, we can keep kidding ourselves that, you know, a studio and an infrastructure, you know, is going to cost us 10, 15, 20 million pounds to build. But the fact of the matter is there are large media organisations you wouldn't define as media organisations, YouTube being one of them, you know, and I think we've got to recognise that we have to have that agility. And I'm going to tell you now, over the next 3 to 5 years, you know, you will see media companies of enterprise levels putting things through things you would never have ever done. And James had already mentioned it, you know, one of the highest rating shows on Netflix, most of it was what I would call industrial, domestic type products. And so let's just not
those same products are being sold to a user-generated content audience because they're usable. The quality, some of the kit's amazing, but it's accessible to a completely different audience now. Sorry, completely different consumer. The operators of that can be a much broader range, even what we've seen with DSLRs, how it's being captured and how that then drifts into our world, even if, like, it's odd even saying that. But bringing it back to the thing of NAB, this conversation is really hard to have on a stand. When it's noisy and you've got 20 minutes and you're constantly trying to work out if you're definitely going to be late for the next one in the hall that's miles away. And one of the kind of relationship problems that you'll find with the supplier you're talking to, or even the client, is trying to convey with authenticity, we can solve your problem. This is how we're going to do it in that split-second moment you've got. So, like, the value of being able to see, there's a box, here's what it does. That's mid-2015 onwards, something like that. And all those learnings we took from COVID that then we are allowed to slip away, and a lot of it's because we've got huge capital investments which we can't just then pivot away from. That time is now, we are in the latter parts of everyone's capital investments that happened after HD or around, 20 years from Take Plus, or those markers are now coming and people are ready for those shifts. And I think those conversations are just too complex to be able to have on a standard NAB.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, interestingly, we've gone a long way as a panel with only a slight mention of AI. I wouldn't be doing justice to the industry if we didn't discuss it. It's been on every event you've ever been to. But now, surely, is the time that AI actually has to deliver something tangible. It's got to be part of this cost efficiency drive. It's got to be its moment. We've got to be brave and work out how to adopt it. Chandni, how did you see AI at the show? Is it still hype, or did you see some real things?
I mean, it can't really be hype anymore because it's so prevalent. But I think probably why there is still hype is that the rate that it changes is so much faster than I think anything we've ever seen before. So it's a moving target for everyone. It means that it's getting bigger, it's getting more complex, it's getting more reliable, more accurate. I don't think it's quite there in terms of reliability and accuracy. However, it fits very well with kind of that business transformation idea, the fact there's less revenue, more platforms, kind of more content needing to be processed, but at a lower cost, at a higher throughput. And that's where AI really thrives, because it's taking those processes that are repeatable, automatable, kind of stringing together things that would have sat independently, but can then work together. And that's really where I think it's going to move at a lightning pace. Generative AI sits in a slightly different box. I think that sits more as a technology rather than kind of an aid or an assist or a way. It's just AI where it's being used is actually just another kind of branch of automation, really, I think. And I think that's where you saw it at the show. It's where it's kind of thriving best, is where it's sitting in those kind of pockets where it's saying, how can we do more with less, and how can we automate it?
Absolutely.
And have AI to use that.
I saw. Sorry.
Accelerating and empowering creativity as opposed to replacing it. It's where it can genuinely provide value add to, as Chandni said, the replacing or removing the repetitive, non-value add tasks, so that our key assets can focus on the areas that are going to create the next adolescent production. Really focus on the quality of the content itself, because that's what's going to differentiate ourselves and the industry at the end of the day.
So if you take that brave pill at GV,
yeah,
where do we see AI dramatically change something in the GV portfolio? What thing have you got to be brave and say to that room full of engineers and the factory, we're going to do it a completely different way?
I think we're taking a measured approach. We're listening rather than telling, and so we're challenging where the application of AI is really going to deliver value to our clients, because we've chased enough hype bubbles in the past. We're not going to chase another one.
You did 3D as well. Okay, yeah,
that was me.
But sorry, I would make one key thing. What we recognise is we're not the best people to develop those tools. And actually, coming back to Darren's point about interoperability, we would much rather partner with best-of-breed AI tool providers than try and do something ourselves. It comes back to the quality of experience for our clients. It comes back to time to market, time to revenue, and
to be competitive in it. Like, you're gonna have, there's only going to be a couple of companies that are going to be able to have that firepower. So to your point, and to your point, it's moving so quickly.
Yep.
Like, you're trying to sustain all the other parts of the business.
You've got to ride the wave.
Yeah. You've got to be able to plug into somebody who can do it and find that opportunity. I feel quite lucky we work in live sport, where the story, we're not having to grapple with image creation quite as much as other sectors. We are far more into the using data properly, data. The generative part of it, we just need to actually manage our data better to start with, then work out what needs to be generative. Other sectors are struggling, grappling much more with the fact that the image creation is a more dynamic part. And if you're in that sector, I imagine chasing the daily almost updates of what's being released and what can create what now, that must be tough.
I mean, so some of the things which I think I was heartened to see, because we've talked about it for a number of NABs, and lots of people obviously put the AI on everything that they did just because everyone else was doing it. But I think what we've suddenly seen, and to James's point, we've seen some larger organisations who are good at this and have been in this, starting to look at agents and the way that they address data. And I do think that that's where probably companies like GV and other enterprise organisations need to start really focusing on, which is how do we make the data that all of the companies have, because it's all different and it's all indexed differently and doesn't have any form of uniformity across the industry, but how do we just have some agents that literally don't care? So they go into the data, they extract out the data they need for that application, that way of working. I do believe that, SaaS is really important and will still be around, but I genuinely believe that agents will become that next SaaS model, which is basically, the uniformity of data isn't needed anymore. We can just send in an agent. We've got an application that we know how we want to run it. It's going to go in, it's going to extract the data it needs for that one process that you now need. And you don't have to keep creating these really complex models that have to go into every company and actually do it. So what I did see at NAB was a number of companies starting to do this. And that, for me, is exciting because I think it will unlock a lot of the problems that all of us are having in organisations where data is the thing that is killing us. Whether it be image data, whether it be just standard metadata. You just look at just the enrichment of IDA and all of those sort of metadata schemas that are coming through. And I can tell you now, just that that link between data, APIs, transferring it, that is what is killing our industry, and we need to move quicker. So I encourage you, Tim, to go and start talking to the big tech companies out there to try and solve that problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to say, kind of going to the other end of the content supply chain as well, something that's really important to talk about in relation to AI and how that's moving is the consumer experience and content discovery. And I think that's something that's also been key to the conversation at NAB. So whether that's, kind of developing an existing streaming service or if you're launching a new fast, what we know is we're now working kind of in an environment of, beyond peak TV. We know all the stats there about how long it takes people to decide what they want to watch. So I just kind of wanted to give a bit of a highlight to that end over on the consumer side of the broadcasting experience, because that continues to be a really key topic of conversation. And again, certainly from the IABM membership, we've got members that are doing some fantastic things there to do, increase the revenue per asset, looking at kind of wide media IP. There's a term, basically transmedia, that I'm looking at, where we're thinking about IP content owned by big studios that's not just siloed within a linear experience or even kind of a TV or feature-length experience. We're thinking about theme parks, we're thinking about video games, we're thinking about that whole media universe. So that customer experience across many platforms, many devices, many locations and times of day, super key. And I think, that's where AI applies itself very well in terms of making sense of disparate data, which again feeds back into what we've already talked about.
Excellent. Well, it's good to hear AI kind of starting to make some sense and be used in real world applications, and certainly I'll look out for the agents. Want to just come back to NAB as a show, but in a way of thinking about everybody, we all went, we all had an experience. It seems important that NAB, IBC and the shows survive. Maybe just quickly with each of you, what would you do to NAB show to improve it? So in a positive way, we make you in charge of the NAB show, and they may be listening to watching this recording, so be careful. But from your experience, what do we need to do to make NAB a more relevant show? I mean, NAB was 55,000 pre-registered visitors. That's about 10,000 down on last year, and a long way off the 100,000 plus we used to get pre-COVID. This seems to be the new normal. CES is on the rise. What would you suggest needs to be done? Suggestions to Jennie?
Oh, me first.
Yeah.
Last.
Moving walkways.
I think it does need to be more inclusive, actually. I mean, I know next year there's randomly going to be a radio and television hall, which I think is quite retro. Sort of looking forward to it. But, you know, and some, you know, people, antennas and whatnot, Vislink will fit into that. But I think it needs to embrace and try and get together the different types of SMEs as well as your larger companies and everything else, and make them try and work together, make them try and understand and listen a lot more, because they don't always listen, to what the customers actually want. But NAB itself needs to help the people who don't go as to what happened, as well as the people who do go, to make it an awful lot simpler. You would have never known that there was a loop that went from west all the way to south, because there was no signage. You know, there was a real lack of feeling that you were somewhere that was really cool and exciting. I think because we were so spread out. I know next year it's going to be west, north and central, which might help. But you would have actually thought you were at 3 different shows, 3 different places. And they need to work together to pull it so that everybody feels they're actually at the same show, pulling together for the same team, regardless of whether it's AV, you know, music, house of worship, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, you two gents as customers, what you know, all the vendors are trying to attract you. You want to see an end-to-end solution. What could NAB or any show do to make it easier for you?
Well, number one, as I said right at the beginning, they've got to find a better way that smaller companies can attend. And I mean that maybe that the larger companies help them because actually they partner with them, they work with them. So that's number one. Number two, the biggest, and I don't know where James experienced that, but I go to the SVG event, I go to the Devoncroft event, and I go to DPP event. And I'll be honest with you, some of those events give me more feedback and more interactions than sometimes, as James said, you go on the stand and then freeze for about 20 minutes while you're thinking about the next meeting. I do believe sometimes those conversations around the show have huge value. So they've got to enable that. And I know they've got to obviously bring revenue, and I know they've got to sustain what they are. But look, let's be really honest about it. CES is 155,000 people, right? And then, you know, NAB is now 55,000 people. So what's not working? Well, number one, maybe it's not cool and maybe it's not relevant. But they've got to change the language. They've got to change the way they interact with people. They've got to understand that they've got to be the cool kids in sort of the way that what are we doing for our customers? And they've got to create those spaces to be able to interact with people much better. And to Jennie's point, it's really hard. And they're going through a building programme, but fundamentally, that split, I'd rather have 2 or 3 smaller halls that actually are together rather than these spread out halls, because I think bigger isn't better. I genuinely believe, you know, when I go to some of the other events, those are the ones where I come away going, oh, I've just learnt a load of new stuff, or I've met a new partner, or I've met a new company, or I've had an interaction that I wouldn't have expected if I just ran from stand to stand to venue to venue. So that's what, in my view, needs to change.
Chandni, what would we do to help a smaller vendor? I mean, it's expensive.
I mean, yeah, it's probably just make it cheaper, isn't it, for this? But I guess it's trying to make sure that we get enough value from the shows, because it is a huge cost, and for small companies also it's a resource drain as well. You take half, well, we take a third of our company there, and that's not. We're still struggling to kind of man that booth, but it's, I guess, making sure that it's just that it has value. I don't really know how that can be done. We actually, I have to say, probably split our time kind of booking the meetings with our customers, but also it's a great opportunity to meet all our partners. And we have to do that part of it to make it worth it, because there aren't enough customer meetings, no matter how hard we try. And a lot of them are just, they're not coming. So we will contact all our customers. Are you coming? Do you want to meet there? And majority of them, it's not that we don't have time, it's that we're not coming at all. And I think that wasn't the case 10 years ago.
Interesting. I mean, is that something you see from an IABM perspective? You're supporting a whole raft of manufacturers.
Well, I think with having the lounge, this is just such a vital resource, actually, right? So from our perspective, actually, it's a very strong show in terms of the amount of footfall and attendance we had in the lounge. Now, we've already covered kind of the footprint of the show, and we are very lucky that we were in a brand new space this year that we're going to continue to be in above the North Hall, and then as from 2026, as the kind of convention centre kind of pinches in around that central with the redevelopment, I'm very optimistic for 2026 and actually what that show profile looks like in terms of the organic footfall, having more time to spend seeing, not just by appointments, if you kind of finish a visit on a booth, then you can go to something that's tangential nearby rather than, risking that kind of 30-minute walk out through from west to south. So I think, for us, we need to continue to be there because we need to continue to support the vendors and our members that do really appreciate that. I think another comment as well, kind of a reflection of the industry as we move to more virtualized solutions, particularly those that are maybe more software driven or cloud-based, cloud compute-based, is there's that change of what do we bring to show? How do we exhibit and demonstrate? So something, again, that IABM does is we offer spaces where some members kind of set themselves up and then they're doing, demos within the member lounge. So we definitely see with these changes, even if overall it's kind of a challenge, we need to reinvent the show. Our role is certainly quite crucial in terms of what we're providing right now for members.
And Tim, do you think you'll continue bringing more partners onto the booth? Is that one of the things that you think helps and maybe you'd encourage other manufacturers to do?
Yeah, definitely. I think when you're asking what could NAB do more, really what we've talked about is it should be a forum to showcase innovation. That's the solutions that the industry are looking for, and it should increase the discoverability of small, innovative technology development or technology providers, and certainly from a GV perspective, we see that as an opportunity, but also a responsibility to provide that platform in the way that AMP is the operating system. We want it to be understood that it really is an open ecosystem, and actually we want to encourage and embrace the best of breed technology solutions to be part of that end-to-end solution. Again, evangelizing and advocating for interoperability. So being able to showcase MXL, I think that would be a key theme for us at IBC, will be actually showing real world, this is the AMP system working with a Riedel system, working with a Lavo system without the friction that is going to hold back investment and innovation. And then I think the other bit we talked about, and we kind of brushed over it as whether we're cool or not, it's thinking through the next generation. There's a responsibility on NAB and all of us in terms of training, education, information sharing. And actually what we've all said is we find more value in that information exchange from SVG, DPP, Devoncroft, dare I say, GVX Forum. None of those were arranged by NAB, none of them are hosted by NAB, and yet they're the organisers, right? And we want to get back to the, I always think about, we used to reflect on the number of tyre kickers. We've got lots of tyre kickers on the booth this year. This was like 10, 15, 20 years ago. What we meant by tyre kickers were young kids out of college. And actually, that's what we want to get back to. We want more young kids that want to kick our technology tyres and be inspired and want to be part of that next phase of the media and entertainment industry.
They can't afford to come to Vegas.
No.
But NAB has a role to play there, right?
Yeah, and I think there's been a controlling part of NAB. You can see it. You can't do this in a hotel from a demonstration point of view. You can't do this. You can't have a show. The disruptors, as they called them, with the various different events that used to happen prior to NAB kind of got curtailed because NAB stopped it. But they're the bits that bring people in. I think they keep forgetting the reason why people come are actually to come to those special events where they have a relevance. Then they go on to actually go on to the show. but they
More
saw it
people
as a
came
disruptor.
for the weekend,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then the first day of the show, and
Yeah.
then from Monday onwards.
Yeah.
You know, and the pre-show bit was just as important as the first day. But unfortunately, the first day, which hall do I go to? You know, they had to make a choice.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, they're very interesting. I think really interesting question. We kind of asked everybody to have a think about, and you may or may not have an answer to this, but amongst all the innovation, the change, and everything that was going on this year, what's the one thing? Did you get time to walk the halls and see one thing or hear one thing that stood out that you'd want to share with the audience here and everybody to go have a look at afterwards? Kind of what caught your eye?
I think I kind of shared mine earlier that for the first time I really felt the suppliers were listening. It sounds like a bit of a cop-out. There were no boxes of like, wow, that's a new cool thing that's got a thing on it that we can then put on our sport. It was more about finally that realisation, the dialogue with the suppliers was much more engaging. The people that they had on their stands you felt like it was much more about them setting their own roadmaps as well, rather than here's a bunch of things we're doing now. And there's a bit of a worry about everyone setting their roadmaps at the same time right now. But at the same time, I felt that dialogue was the most refreshing I've had in a long time. Whereas previously it's been, here's what we're going to tell you, or me saying, well, that's not going to work. It was much more about how do I make sure that you can protect your roadmap and I can fit into that at the same time. That felt like a refreshing conversation.
Okay. Darren,
yeah, I'm just going to pick up on what Tim said. Innovation, from a point of view of me, I go round, I get really excited by the industry still. And I think when I found those companies that were pushing out of their norm, in other words, companies that were doing things which, even having, different people on their booth, but I'll give you a few examples. Larwo, as we know, is not a sound desk. It's a video desk, but has the ability to do sound as well. But now is about spinning up services. So they've got this new ecosystem. They've had it for a while called Home. The Home is becoming much more of I need a video wall. So let me just spin up a service for a few minutes while I build my new video wall. I want another service. And you can see they're layering service and service. Riedel was the same, software, comms. Well, we should have had that years ago, but fundamentally it's now starting to become reality. Even sort of prime focus technology and their clear processes, which are showing services that actually I could use. So that's innovation. Again, I talked about it, but, talking about how people are reinventing themselves as companies. And I think what the main thing for me is, going back to your point, Tim, I just want NAB to be innovation going forward. In other words, I know we've got to sell the tech that we buy to fill these studios and fill the infrastructure, but I actually want that innovation to be the first thing I think about when I walk on your stand, and then we can have conversations about the other stuff as well. Because when everyone comes back from NAB, the first thing people say is, "They've seen anything new? Any new tech?" And then we all look at each other and go, "Well, yeah, I saw a couple of things."
That's where like business innovation, like the word innovation, frustrates me in what we do anyway, because it's viewed as being a piece of tech only. But all of these conversations, there needs to be something that addresses more. I know we're jumping back a question about what we need to have more of, but there needs to be something at NAB which grapples more with that business innovation, how we operate, all of those parts, because they happen on the conversations off stand. People don't really sell you those services as such. There's a level of consultancy around, but the dynamics of how we work should be much more of a part of NAB in itself, I feel.
Excellent. So this is the point. I want to just see if anybody's got any burning questions. You've got 6 experts who spent their time. Just wait for a microphone to head up here to the front row here. And let's get our first question.
Hi there. Yeah, Steve Benedict. There was an interesting comment from a visitor to NAB along the lines of, he heard a lot about metadata schemas, XML sidecars, but where was YouTube? Where was TikTok? Where was this huge creator community? And I suppose the question is, where will NAB and broadcast meet this world? And if they don't meet it, will they get consumed by it?
Can I jump in on that?
Please, Chris. Creative Lab.
So so I can answer very precisely. Right in the middle of South Hall, there's a whole creator lab area, and they had 3 content stages. I managed to get along to one of them again to listen to some of the creators doing shoppable content. So again, looking at how creator-led. What I love about creators, right, is they are super agile. They are data-driven in terms of how they build their content, and then they know how to monetize that. Because if you go through that creator journey to become a full-time creator, you have to be able to monetize UGC. And this session was, absolutely fascinating. But I was very surprised at how much presence there was in a very localized area, but how little that kind of spilled over. And I think it's one of those things of what we were saying about the show floor plan of if you didn't know it was there, if you weren't actively seeking it out, it might just completely go off your radar. But I think NAB have been doing some great stuff to engage with the creator economy, but I think we could be doing more, is my personal take on it.
No, I agree.
I mean, just to add to that, I didn't know that. And I went absolutely everywhere and tried to.
Yeah.
But, to Steve's point, I think we've just got to recognise, why are we here? What are we fundamentally doing? And how are people consuming it? And actually, that relevance, if we go back to that 155,000 going to CES, down to 55,000, that relevance needs to come back in. So I genuinely think, to a point, signposting those things big time. I mean, they're as important as the other people in the hall. So I think we do need to change that, because there has to be a relevance with the people that are using our content.
Yeah.
So it was there, but quite a few people missed it. So that's worrying in itself.
Genuinely, didn't see a thing on IBC Daily.
Okay.
Yeah.
NAB.
Oh, sorry, that's NAB. That's why. Yeah. That's ready for IBC. Yeah.
Next question, Neil.
Just interested, nobody's mentioned NAB conference, mentioned SVG Devoncroft. Is that something you attend? And the reason I'm asking is I think it had a reputation of being really weak compared with IBC. IBC was where you went to the conference, NAB didn't. I got a bit involved this year. There were over 200 speakers, and there was one guy that even announced his candidacy to run against Trump. I mean,
I should have gone.
So I think it's become quite significant. I'm just curious whether you attend at all.
No, neither. And previously I've not really found the conferences super engaging, then discovered Devoncroft, and it's one of those ones where you actually put your hand in your pocket. I haven't found a way of getting a free ticket out of them yet. So you pick and choose which ones you're going to want, and your time, you've gone all that way. You've got to weigh up the value of being in conferences versus walking the floor, and it comes back to that cost benefit of where am I going to spend my time? Can I read up on it afterwards? Can I just watch the video back of it? So you end up weighing those up almost too much, and the volume of it. What am I going to pick? What is going to be the best use of my time?
There was a massive sports thread, by the way.
Yeah.
Whole series on sports. Yeah.
Yes, but even those, what am I, in this changing world, do I think I'm going to get what I want out of the conferences? I need to be won over a little bit more in those.
My session was really good.
I suspected we might get there.
I mean, one last thing, just on that point. They are really good, and I see prior to NAB, you see all the lineup. You think, oh wow, that's. Then you look at the price of some of these things, you think, I really can't do that. And the shame of that is the whole reason to be there is to be dragged into these events that you think that's the reason to go. But the reason why you don't go is because they're too expensive, and just to James's point, you've got to put where your money is going to go. Well, I'm there to see suppliers and various different contacts. So I do think they need to think long and hard the relevance of those events, and say, if I was them, I'd do a really good half-day session, brilliant people, or even a day session, and make it free. And I can tell you now, people will be clamouring to get in, and people will want to go to the event to try and get in. And I think that in itself, they could probably fill a hall, and I think that would drag people back into that relevance again of why they want to go to NAB.
Okay. Next question.
David Phillips from Multicast Consultancy. My perception is on covering a lot of things that you picked up on. It's the cost. Vegas has become horrendously expensive. Yeah. Even gamblers who go there to gamble are complaining now that the cost, the resort fees, the hotel nights, the travel, it's extortionate. But I think there's a grave danger that NAB is now going to slip into becoming an America's show. Yeah. Because it's just too expensive and too time-consuming. So if it starts on a Sunday, my perception of the Sunday was it was a quieter day than Monday, because a lot of people don't like, in that environment, to go on the Sunday. IBC works in that respect, but I don't think NAB does. And my perception also is that there are far fewer Europeans from the big broadcasters, the medium broadcasters, and actually end clients who we as suppliers wish to be able to have an audience with. And so it's great for us to talk about AMP and other manufacturers joining that platform, Tim. Yeah, that's all good stuff. And the interfacing with IABM and DPP, Devoncroft, is all good. But ultimately, it should be a selling show. And the CFOs, the CEOs of all of the companies are saying, what are you learning? What are you coming back with? Why don't you just go to IBC? Because it's far cheaper. So I think NAB has to watch itself. We've gone past the COVID argument now. The numbers are still coming down. And there isn't that interest or the appetite from broadcasters to send their staff away for the costs. So I think it's in danger of becoming an America's focused show.
But it always used to be. NAB used to be a North American show. Yeah. And then, I'm not too sure, maybe 10-ish years ago, it changed and we all hopped on planes and it became far more, European and global, as it were. But fundamentally, NAB was actually a North American show. And I'm not sure that that's a bad thing. Like we've got, my gosh, May's a nightmare. So we've got, sort of CABSAT, we've got MPTS, we've got COBA, we've got Broadcast Asia, we're all doing the world tour. But the regional shows, I think, are really, really beneficial. IBC is fundamentally an international show. Sort of not as many Americans come over. So, and maybe that's where, when we need to talk to our partners and different things, it becomes more regional and relevant rather than the wider and not as relevant.
Yeah, and Vegas has grown up quicker than NAB. So to that point, it used to be one of the taxi drivers was almost looking at me like, what show are you at?
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas
totally.
when I first started going, it was the second biggest show in Vegas. Now there are many more ahead of it. Its relevance isn't there. The tourists, that's what Vegas needed to get to. That is the more dominant part. So
CinemaCon was on at the same time as us.
Yeah, there's no
Tom
cheap...
Cruise was in town.
Yeah, there's no cheap moment to go there anymore.
No.
So, it runs a risk of costing itself out of the market. So I think...
Where are the $5 buffets?
Yeah, in your dreams.
Yeah.
Not so much $5 buffets, it was $6 bottles of water. Was the
plus tip. So I got a bottle of water outside of a vending machine, and it asked me for a tip. And I mean, taxis, the tip starts at 23%, and restaurants at 30%. I mean, that's what's really, that's a killer.
I can tell you where the free water was. That was in the IABM lounge, sponsored by Lava.
So, there we go. Any more questions? Right over the back there.
We all pay, you're right.
We were open between 12 and 2 to come and see our sessions for free, yeah.
In terms of the NAB piece, is there not also an argument, your question earlier on, that Europe is going on a different tangent to what North America are doing, like whether it's remote broadcast or like, I feel like we're quite far advanced, and so we're not necessarily getting those learnings from North America anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's very good because Tom's from IMG. So, good question, Tom. But yeah, there's definitely I think it's true. The position where the European markets are at versus some of the conversations in America. There are definitely multiple conversations in America, but those conversations are in different places. So and that sets the tone around the whole conference. So I think those. Either that will change over time or they'll continue in different directions, much like the conversation in the Middle East is different. So there are these, I think we will come to an acceptance that the globalization of our industry means that there are going to be regional elements to it. We can't all maintain a certain level of broadcast in all of our leagues or all of our productions. And how we operate across those territories will be represented by our nearest version of a show.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not a bad thing. I mean, going forward. I mean, again, bit like, you know, what we've got to do in our industry about being a bit more financially astute. I think, you know, we've got to really see where that innovation is and where that place is that we're going to go and find that innovation. I think to your point earlier around the value of it, it fundamentally is about bringing something new back. And so to Tom's point around obviously slightly different ways of thinking, I think definitely, you know, it's much heavier and a bit slower over there. And I think, you know, from a European point of view, I think we are willing to take a bit more choice and chance because we don't have the same level of deep pots. So I think if it went that way, it's not the end of the world. And I think it's something we probably have to recognise. And I think if you look at some of the smaller shows that are happening in the UK even, MTTS and all of those type of things that are happening, then actually last year I went to that and I was astounded by how many people were going to it. So they're pretty good as well.
I've got more involved with startup conferences, startup accelerator programs to try and meet those, almost going the small to the tiny companies, so that you can get some visibility of different ways of thinking on those areas as well. So I think it'll be up to us to choose more what we want, and it's not all about one show in April every year anymore. It's about who do we send, the right people going to the right places for the right reasons.
I think from a vendor perspective, it is the regional relevance. Tom, I agree that it is different conversations that we're having at IBC than we are at NAB. And, you know, the whole industry is under that, what's the value for money? And so from a vendor perspective, okay, so do we scale back on the regional events and protect the very significant spend on NAB and IBC?
Yeah.
Our current thinking is, no, we'd rather protect the spend on the regional events because we get much higher quality conversations, more time with our clients and partners. And if that means it's at the expense of scaling back a little on IBC and NAB, so be it.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think you need to have those closer relationships, really understand what's happening rather than a transactional, high level, you know, the CEO's meeting conversation isn't going to move anything really. Whereas if you get the direct software devs meeting, you know, that could be a quality conversation.
Yeah.
To expose that is going to be regional.
We find the regional shows are actually bringing a lot more value than NAB and lesser extent IBC, because we have customers all around the world, and I have to say the European requirements from a technology point of view are more innovative. They are a bit more fast-paced. I think when we talk to our American customers, they are more big scale, kind of cost saving, focused in terms of what their requirements are. But those regional shows are really important for us as a small company to kind of start. You get more attention, you get more focus kind of in those scenarios than the big shows where you're kind of lost in the noise.
Absolutely. Excellent. Right. One last question, last one of the evening.
Thank you, Andy Bill. One point to answer your question, as a first-time vendor this year, NAB needs to provide a software to find industry now. It needs to provide internet that works. And there's only, in the West Hall, there's only one vendor that I met who had a successful internet delivery. They started with A and ended in S. They spent a vast amount of money on a direct connect, so avoided all the LVCC problems. It's absolutely horrific, and NAB have got to sort it out. My question is, I noticed with great interest, but very little comment, that as well as the numbers being reduced to 55,000, the percentage of new registrations was over 50%. I'm interested in whether anyone on the panel's noticed that, the effect of that and what it means as a global trend to our industry, and B, the impact of the visitors that were coming.
Or companies renaming themselves.
Yes.
That's true.
M&A,
I think some of the areas that are kind of nascent around the software pieces, it can be harder to visibly see walking the show floor some of the newer players, because there's less of this demonstration piece. And I think we do see this somewhat in the lounge. I think one of the pieces I've seen, particularly on the kind of the south lower, that's where I've been seeing some of the newer companies entering that are either building around that creator economy piece, that are trying to kind of target tools and solutions and workflow management. And they're kind of spinning off of the traditional nonlinear editors, and then kind of see some of the stuff that's happening kind of as tack-ons to cloud storage solutions. That's where my gut feel anecdotally is where some of that new movement is personally.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Andy. We should have brought it up earlier. There were definitely some companies that, when I was walking around, and again, I go back to this, I really want to go there for innovation. So I always walk the edges of the halls just to see some of those things. And I think what I did see is a lot more of those smaller companies right at the back, certainly at the West Hall, that actually were interesting and really good. And I spent quite a bit of time with some of those, probably more sometimes than the larger organisations. So yes, I did see a few things. The problem is, I think when you walk through the halls, you see the big companies first, and then you miss the small companies that are behind. But I do think, what I want to see is more of that. I'd love to bring those forward. And that's why I keep saying, having that, it's about that innovation. It's about that sort of new and fresh ideas. It's about having conversations that are much more different than what we had a few years ago, which is about heavy tech, more about, well, what's the solution you provide? How do you provide it? So I think going forward, for me personally, whenever I go to these things, I'm going to target that. And I think from a registration point of view, I think we do need to recognise that there is a change and we have to go with that change as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all of our panel, and over to Jennie.